there that are really excited about ancient Rome and excited about how people lived a long time ago. So what we do is we are based in Rome. We have a nice digital team throughout the world, but I'm in Rome right now. I'm an archaeologist, and I'm here to answer a lot of questions that you have sent in to me. And we'll be doing this every Wednesday at this time for about a half an hour. And the idea is right now, what's happening around the world. What's happening is so many of us are asked, I've been asked to stay at home. So in Italy, we're staying at home. I know in the United States, it's becoming a real issue and people are starting to stay at home. So we want to be able to provide to you, your kids are still learning. My kids are still learning as well. They're doing their online classes right now. And I want to share some of that knowledge and enthusiasm for the ancient world. So a lot of you have already sent me a lot of questions. So let's dive into it. But really what I want to do is talk about something really timely, which is how do the Romans deal with disease? How do they deal with bad times like this? I mean, it's not like we're going through something right now with an outbreak that's affecting the world that didn't happen before in the past. It's happened throughout all of history. All civilizations, all peoples have faced pestilences, plagues, and whatnot. So before we get into it, just really quickly, a lot of great questions, and keep sending me those questions. When did Roman kids stop going to school? Well, you know, the boys were going to school longer than the girls. Let's say the boys, by the time they're men, which would be about 14, 15, 16 years old or so. For girls, they're not getting as much of an education, and they're going to be spending more time learning to manage the household and household chores and spinning wool to make clothes and so forth. So it's not a one-to-one that the boys and girls were all doing the same things. What kind of sports they have? Well, they did athletics, they did running, they did wrestling. If you're lucky enough to afford it, you'd be learning how to ride a horse. So there are all kinds of things that we do today that they were doing. Skip, jump rope, play with an inflated pig's bladder as a ball to kick around or to throw. So they have a lot of things in common with what we do or kids do as well. We like to have fun, we like to annoy our parents, and then we like to also run outside and get really busy, get dirty, get in trouble, and then come back inside and wash up. But the Romans, of course, would have to go to the baths usually to do that. What about toilet paper? Toilet paper is in the news a lot nowadays. Did they have toilet paper? No, they did not. What typically did they use? Well, famously, they have a system in place where when you go to the baths and they take a stick, it's called a caesorium, and it has a sponge on the top. Today, if you see a sponge, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be something that's artificial, something that's man-made. But they would use real sponges from the sea, put it on the stick. You do your business in the toilet, and then you would dip this sponge at the end of the stick in water, and then you would reach down and you would clean yourself. So today, how do you clean yourself? With toilet paper. Sometimes I'm reading now in the newspapers, people can't find toilet paper, but basically they didn't have toilet paper because paper was something in the ancient Roman times that was so expensive. So, you know, you used the papyrus reeds, squashed them together, you made paper. You weren't going to use that for your cleaning yourself every day. You use sponge on a stick, if you were lucky. Okay, so let's, and there are other questions, and great questions. Do they have pets? Sure, dogs, cats. What do they eat? Well, you know, they ate, when you think, well, I'm in Italy, right? I'm in Rome. When you think about Italy, you think about pizza, and you think about tomatoes, and you think about pasta, but those things didn't exist. So what they're eating, not so, we can actually spend a whole time talking about what the Romans ate on a daily basis, but definitely legumes, beans, lentils. Maybe you're not too excited about that stuff, but the Romans, that's what they ate. Cabbage. Of course, if you're lucky enough to have meat, it's local game, it's cheese, it's eggs, it's dried meats. Of course, when we think about Italy, we have prosciutto. Maybe you've had that before. So salted meats were always were being consumed. The main thing is to think that they didn't have refrigerators. They didn't have a lot of things that we have that we take for granted. So obviously people a long time ago, how did they survive? A lot of things were preserved in oil or with salt so that they would last a long time, because a lot of the food, so much of the food was seasonal. So what season is it? Oh, we can have these strawberries, but then we can't go to the store later on and get it because they're not in season. Today, you kind of, in big cities, you can get pretty much anything at any time, but that's because we have a big industry behind that's producing things out of season. Okay, so let's just really dive into it because we don't have a whole lot of time. I wanted to talk to you about, again, what's going on in the world right now. We have a big outbreak. We are all keeping to ourselves. We're keeping a distance. We don't want to get infected. Or if we have COVID-19, we don't want to give it to somebody else. So we're isolating ourselves from other people. And we do have some observations and antiquity by the doctors, right? They didn't have advanced medicines. They didn't have the knowledge that we have today. They didn't have antibiotics, but they certainly could observe. And we have some famous people observing what happened when people got sick, what people did around them, how they got sick or how they did not get sick, and then how they recovered. So that's the best that they could do in those days. So for a very long time, there was this idea that you could remove yourself from that contaminated population and bring yourself away, but not on the level of which governments around the world are asking us to do. But anyways, how do they deal with disease? How do they identify it? Well, going back all the way to the time of the Iliad, so going back to the time of Achilles and Hector, there is in the epic poem the recording of a pestilence that first struck animals and then passed over to human beings during this war. And you think about what's happening today. We have a virus that is spread, and it went from first affecting animals, and then it passed to human beings. And in fact, if you like this stuff, if the parents are watching, I have a podcast with a colleague who is an expert in this subject, and I've talked with him, and I'm going to be putting up that podcast on my podcast. That's going to be coming back in action season 2 in the next couple of weeks. So I see there's a good chat going on here, and I appreciate that. And I'm going to try to see if I can parallel a little bit with some of the questions and concerns. So anyways, you have, for a very long time, a record of pestilence, plagues, way before the Romans. You have these ideas floating around about something breaks out, spreads to people very quickly, people get sick, people die, what do we do? So in the early phases of all of this, the idea was you pray to the gods. Pray to the gods, make a sacrifice. Something is wrong with that relationship between mortals and immortals. Let's give them something more. We've done something wrong. Should we punish someone in our society? It's that kind of thing that goes back and forth for the Romans. But the reality is, when these outbreaks took place, and all throughout Roman history, in the time of the kings, in the Republic, in the imperial period, plagues are breaking out. Pestilences are recorded. You made vows. I will give you Apollo, a new temple, in the 5th century BCE. The plague ended, and the Romans fulfilled their vow. They built a temple. So there's one such temple in Rome, the temple of Apollo Socianus, last built in the reign of Augustus. But the premise was the construction of the temple back in the 5th century BC was that there was a pestilence. People died in great numbers. They venerated the god that's associated with medicine. Another god is Asclepius. And then the plague ended. The god must have helped. Let's now build him a temple. So that's one kind of response. Another one is to go to Asclepius. Asclepius is the god of medicine. And in fact, who is the wife of Asclepius? Hygiene. Imagine that. So his wife is Hygiene, and he is the god of medicine. And his temple is on the Tiber Island. It is not just by chance, because what do you do with sick people? This idea is there for a long time. You isolate them. So it's a very long tradition of putting people away from the general population. Put those sick people over here. They're doing this with addressing leprosy, putting lepers away from the general population. And in this case here, a plague breaks out. That's not a bad idea either. Okay, so what about, let's just talk about hygiene for the Romans. We talked about toilet paper, the tessorium to use to clean the bottom. You know, how clean can the Romans get? We have aqueducts, and also we have videos on the history of aqueducts on ancientromelive.org. So there's a lot of water coming into the city. But another thing to really keep in mind that the Romans have to deal with is they have the Tiber River. The Tiber River floods all the time. And what's a result? Oftentimes when you get a lot of flooding, you get swampy water, you get malaria. So all throughout the Roman history, Romans had to deal with malaria. They never got rid of it. So when you finish the Romans and you're going on to the next period, you're talking about the king, the popes and the Renaissance and all this great art and Michelangelo and Raphael. This year we're celebrating 500 years after the death of Raphael, the famous artist and painter. You just deal with malaria by leaving that situation down by the river and going up to the higher hills. There's a famous papal palace built on the Quirinal Hill just for that reason. So you have people understanding that there are going to be occasional outbreaks and disease. Get away from it as much as you can. Today, we're told to wash our hands with soap. Did the Romans have soap? Okay. They preferred to wipe their body with olive oil and scrape it off, which has some benefits to your skin. But soap does indeed exist in the time of the Romans, but it's just not that, it's not that common. So what is soap? Soap, the Romans say in the 1st century AD, it's basically a combination of ash with tallow, or basically animal fat. And you mix that together. That's what the Gauls are doing, the guys in what we call France today. It's coming down here to the Romans, and the Romans are saying, well, it's something you put in your hair, and it does some good things for you. So that's about the extent that we really see about soap. It's going to pick up in its use in the later centuries, 3rd, 4th centuries AD. What are they using to keep their clothes clean? Because Romans get dirty, kids fall in a puddle, and they get their clothes dirty, they have to be washed. What are you going to do? Well, you go to the dry cleaner. So the dry cleaners use something we call fuller's earth. So it's a kind of a loamy, sudsy material that basically can, we'd say, decolorize. It kind of takes away and deodorizes what you're washing. So it's something that kind of has some properties like soap. They also use urine. So it's another material that has ammonium in it. We don't really think about today when we clean our clothes by urinating on something, but it has the properties, the chemical properties that can remove the dirt. And then of course you have to rinse it out. So we want to think in terms of just a little bit about that daily life. Where do you live? Where do you guys live? It is nasty, as there's a comment. And there are lots of Phalonicas, lots of these buildings and shops that you can see throughout the Roman world. My favorite personally is the one in Ostia Antica, which is the port city of Rome. Okay, let's think about where you live. I live in Rome. So I live like most people in an apartment. And nowadays we have an elevator to go upstairs, but most people, right, in antiquity, you didn't have it. So whereas today you'd love to be on the top floor of an apartment and have a beautiful view of Rome, in ancient times, you want to be on the ground floor because if there's a fire, you can get out. Your rooms are bigger, your ceilings are higher, and as you go higher and higher up in these apartment buildings, the rooms get smaller, the ceiling height gets lower, it's less comfortable, plus you have to walk up all those stairs every day. So just give you an idea of the realities. If you're wealthy down below on the ground floor, then you can have access to water very easily. You could even have a fountain in your ground floor apartment. but up on top, really no water, which means if you want water, if you want the basic needs, you'd have to go down all those stairs and get that material and go all the way up, or you usually end up eating out in a little cafe or a little bar, having a sandwich or whatnot. And that's how a lot of Romans lived their life. What about going to the bathroom? Let's get back to fundamentals. We're talking about soap, toilet paper. Well, in your house, unless you're very wealthy or you live on the ground floor, you would go to the bathroom in what we call a chamber pot, like a bowl, and then you throw it out the window onto the street where people are walking. So Rome became a big metropolis, maybe 1 million people, and the hustle and the bustle and all these people walking around and carrying things and ox carts full of material, and you have human waste oftentimes in the street. So you have fountains. Fountains can be used by some of the slaves that are employed or owned by the city to keep the cities clean, and so on and so forth. And of course, the Romans are famous for the big sewer line, the Cloaca Maxima. That's really though for draining out the water away, keeping away, let's say, malaria at bay. But ultimately, it's used as a sewer line. So you do have some ideas of how the Romans are trying to tackle all these people, all this human waste, all this filth, all this potential, let's say, for outbreak of disease. And on the other side, you see that they don't really quite get it the way that we get it, right? And that's a very interesting thing to see. And let's say then the biggest moment, there are firefighters in ancient Rome as well as street cleaners, and also a fire department, the vigiles. There are 14 regions in Rome, and every 2 regions, you have a fire department. But let's come down to the big thing, which is you've got aqueducts, you've got baths, you've got people bathing, you've got people being clean, which is great because you probably don't, unless you're very wealthy, you don't have baths in your house. Hot water, massages, palestra, gyms to work out and box and wrestle and lounge about, get entertained and so forth. But there's no water in the chlorine. So imagine the people going in the pool of water over and over and over again. And, little kids watching, maybe, you think about the paranoia of your parents, and we don't want you to go to the bathroom in the swimming pool, because if you do, everybody's going to get in real trouble. Well, in ancient times, you have different people writing about the lives in the baths, but they're basically saying stuff like, now remember, if you have diarrhea, do not go to the baths, okay? But you're not really forbidden to go to the baths. I'm just giving you an idea of the range of people and potential diseases. I mean, how do we want to look at the baths, the great baths of the Romans, and they're beautiful, and the baths of Caracalla? How do we really want to think about those baths? I think about it in terms of, if I want to just, pull myself back from that kind of dirty reality, I'm thinking glorious architecture, the shiny marble, the attendance, the way that you could go through the rooms and they're heated, and the technology to go to the hot spas so long ago. And the reality is, how clean was that water? What opportunity did you have for getting sick? So we kind of think about the ways in which disease is spread and so forth. And again, they didn't have the foresight or the ideas of cleaning water in those pools in the same way that we think today. And of course, life was very harsh. A huge infant mortality rate. Little children, when you had a child, you didn't say, my kid's going to college. You thought, is my kid going to live to 1? Is my kid going to live to 2 and 3 and so forth? And in fact, you had these protective amulets called a bulla, and the children wore them. And when they became an adult at about 15, like having a bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, you would then become an adult in society, and you could then finally relinquish and take off that amulet and put it in a shrine. So they really, really, really were paranoid that people weren't going to live to adulthood, which really for them started at about 14, 15, 16 years old. Let's pass to the 2nd century. The 2nd century, time of the emperors, and the plague of Galen. And we have a recording in the 160s that when the Romans go off to fight against Parthia, basically Iran and Iraq, they bring back from that episode of war, they bring back a pestilence. And then the pestilence with soldiers spreads throughout the empire. And it's bad. We have different recordings about it. We have a lot of scientific analysis trying to identify, was it measles, was it smallpox, what was it? And Galen is the rock star doctor at the time who's doing dissection, who's risking everything, and he's diagnosing, and he's treating, and he's doing his best, and so forth. And we're told that it was really bad. Maybe up to 2,000 people a day were dying. This is something that eventually, I mean, the Romans don't have a cure for it, but eventually even emperors succumb to this. And in the end, it does die down, only to flare up again and again over the succeeding decades. So that's really, that gives you an idea, I'd say today, we just want to contextualize just a little bit these diseases. Why are we isolating ourselves? Why are we not touching anybody? Why are we avoiding crowds and so forth? Is we want this COVID-19, this virus to go away. The Romans didn't quite get that. So when it went away for a bit, it never actually went away. And then it flared up again. And so what we're doing today, we're washing our hands, we're keeping distance from people, we are isolating ourselves. A country like Italy was hit pretty early on in Europe, and so we have a lot of cases, and we're pretty much doing our contribution is not to go out. Our contribution is not to, we only see our friends visually, virtually. I started up these videos for the kids and for everyone else, basically in light of these realities. And we have technology, and we have a lot of smart people, and we have a lot of people working on the current situation. So I think that we still can look at the ancients, we can look at the Romans, we can be fascinated by them, we can see them through the lens of time, and we can appreciate a lot of their efforts. We can marvel at their architecture. We can still read in Latin or Greek their great literature. But really what it is an opportunity to be in contact with people that lived a long time ago and made some really, really incredible contributions to civilization. So that's really what I wanted to say. Let me see if I can see if anything else. Yeah, Lucius Verus, the emperor, got sick. Marcus Aurelius got sick. We don't know if ultimately they got sick from that, the so-called Antonine Plague, but a lot of people were dying from that. And so what I want to do then is pretty much, think I will see if I have any specific, let's see if a couple more, okay, little wrapping up here, some questions. Let's see here. Yes, they had dogs. If you want to think about, do the Roman world, do the Romans and Greeks have dogs? Just look at that, look up that famous black and white mosaic from Pompeii, just above the, right by the Forum of Pompeii, and it says Kavaikana, which I think a lot of you have heard that phrase before, beware of dog. So yes, people had pets, people had guard dogs. Let's see here. Oh, money. Someone's asking about money, what kind of money they had. Yes, oh boy, that's a huge issue, but they absolutely did have money. They debased their money. That means they if they had a silver coin or a gold coin or whatnot, they put their stamp on it and gave it the validity of X amount of gold, but they had debased it so they keep a little for themselves. And over that time, with the dominion of Rome and the Roman Empire, the denarius was the coin of choice. It was, I don't know, it's like the US dollar or something like that, or the euro. It was a very powerful money system that the Romans created. Oh, what kind of jobs there in ancient Rome? Oh, so many jobs. Hairstylist, masseuse, carpenter, bricklayer, architect, doctor, Latin teacher, Greek teacher, for those of you that are studying Latin and Greek. Do patricians live in apartments or where they're wealthy enough to own villas? Depends, yeah, but you basically, if you're a senator or patrician, you're pretty wealthy. Unless you're a guy like Julius Caesar in the start of his career, he had run out of money. So he had to claw his way to the top, but he had this. His brain, that's what you need to start off anywhere, is a good brain and an aptitude and study, and then he went very far with that. But he didn't start off with like his parents' money, because really the money at that point when he was growing up had run out, even though he was of patrician status. So he grew up in the Subura, which is kind of that's a nice part of town in ancient Rome. What kind of holidays did they ever have? Oh, we could walk through the calendar. So many festivals. So the one where you become a man is actually usually celebrated in the Liberalia, which was yesterday, March 17th. So there's a lot of really, really good stuff I think we can talk about. I appreciate it. Please do send me through Twitter or Instagram or email more questions, because I'll be doing this for the kids on Wednesdays at 5 p.m. And then on Sundays, bigger lectures, more, I would say more lecture style, but it will be, you know, not so much for a kid audience, and that is on Sundays at 5 p.m., always from Rome. We remain on lockdown, we remain enthusiastic, and we have a lot of new content. All these lectures will be on our YouTube channel, We Dig Rome. So we encourage you, we ask you to sign up to our YouTube channel, look at the content on ancientromelive.org. Please consider contributing to sustain us. We are a U.S. nonprofit. Thank you guys so much. Have a good one. Goodbye from Rome.